Hey everyone, Dodge here again at Team Chaos MTG on YouTube. This past weekend, the Players Tour in Phoenix happened, the format was Pioneer, and the results were pretty good. A lot of people were expecting that the Lotus Breach deck would take over the top 8, and for what it's worth, it made it to the finals, but the top 8 was actually fairly diverse. While there were two copies each of the Lotus Breach deck and Dimir Inverter combo, we also saw Control, Sultai Delirium, Spirits, and Mono Red Aggro all take a spot in the top 8. And that seems really nice to me. It's good to know that the format is more or less wide open, even if there are a couple of combo decks that are knocking tournaments down left and right. Now, I'm not going to be talking about every deck in the top 8 in this video. In fact, I only want to touch on a few of them, but for what it's worth, let's go ahead and take a look at the two final deck lists from the event, which, as should be no surprise to anyone, were Dimir Inverter and Lotus Breach. And here we have them. Corey Burkhart knocked down the whole tournament with his version of Dimir Inverter, and the deck looks really good. It's obviously well positioned and built, tuned, ready to go for just about anything it comes up against. Huey Jensen came in second place with Lotus Breach, and again, another solid deck list. Fae of Wishes and a very diverse sideboard allows him to take over the game no matter what matchup there is, and while it wasn't enough to close out the entire tournament, coming in second is not too shabby. Both of these decks, absolute powerhouses. But as with all things Magic, with great power comes great concern. Concern that something might be banned. While formats like Modern and Legacy have had a long history of seeing decks come and go and combo strategies rising to the top, we also know that when things are too good or too consistent, frequently something is going to be removed. And while I don't think either of these decks are oppressive, they are very, very good, and it's not insane to think that maybe we'll see something go in the near future. Now, I'm not expecting that anything is going to be removed from the format. As the top 8 shows, it's in a healthy place. You can play just about any deck you want to right now and still do reasonably well. But for the sake of this conversation, I've gone through the lists and looked at the meta for the format, and I've found 3 cards in each deck that could very well end up on the chopping block. So let's go ahead and take a look at those and see what exactly we're working with, or might not be working with for much longer. As the deck's namesake, Inverter of Truth could see a banning and be an easy way for Wizards to make sure that the Inverter deck doesn't continue being as good as it is. In fact, it just wouldn't be the Inverter deck anymore, it would be the Thassa's Oracle deck, and people playing it would have to find a whole new way to make sure that they can actually win with an Oracle. Or the win condition could just be removed entirely and Thassa's Oracle could get banned. I don't see that being particularly likely, but it is always a possibility. Now there's also Dig Through Time, which does a really good job of making sure that you have both of your combo pieces in hand, as well as seeing that there isn't a whole lot of cards in the graveyard left to replace your library with when Inverter of Truth comes down. If we're going to assume that any of these are going to go, I'd say that it's probably Inverter itself, because Thassa's Oracle on its own isn't particularly good at winning the game, and Dig Through Time does see play in a lot of other decks that Wizards might not want to kick in the shins. Moving along to the deck that took second place this past weekend, Underworld Breach is again the namesake of the deck, or one of the namesakes, and it would be very easy for it to get banned. Or Lotus Field could go. Or Thespian Stage. If we're going to operate under the assumption that something from this list is going to go, I would actually hope that it would be the stage. If you only have Lotus Fields and no way to copy them while circumventing the sacrifice 2 lands clause, it becomes much more difficult to combo off with the deck, and any amount of consistency lost is probably enough to justify it staying in the format, at least in some form. Really, I think the deck is fine, but again, if we're just going to, for argument's sake, say that the deck is going to be nerfed, yeah, stage seems like the appropriate thing to get rid of. So let's say that one or both of these decks do see something get removed from them in the form of a ban. What do we do then? Well, in my mind, you just want to go with the deck that's best positioned to take on the general field. And if you have to ask me, which, I mean, you don't have to, but obviously you're wondering what I'm thinking on the subject because you're here watching this incredibly poorly edited video. And if I was going to answer, I'd say play Bant Spirits. It did make it to the top 8, and while it's not the best deck in the format by any means, it is probably one of the best positioned decks in the format. Let's take a look at Thomas Ashton's list from the top 8 of PT Phoenix. Now, this isn't doing anything we haven't seen before, but it is doing a couple of things and it's doing them very well. It maintains tempo while controlling the board, making sure your opponent doesn't combo off too easily, and also it builds big threats very, very quickly. It also operates almost entirely at instant speed, or if you have a Rattle Chains on the field, it just is operating entirely at instant speed, regardless of cards like Spectral Sailor not actually having flash printed on them. There's also Spell Queller, which is a really, really good card. It does almost everything you want it to. It gets in the air with evasion, it comes down at instant speed, it exiles spells with CMC 4 or less, and because it's not countering them, it hits things like your opponent's Supreme Verdict, which, if they're on Lotus Breach, they might have fetched from the sideboard with a Fae of Witches. But you don't have to rely on Spell Queller itself, because it has a lot of friends that do a lot of things very well to protect your game plan. I mean, we've got Selfless Spirit also making sure that your creatures don't get destroyed. We've got Mausoleum Wanderer shutting down random instant and sorcery spells. And we've got Remorseful Cleric to make sure that if your opponent needs access to their graveyard, they just don't have that anymore. Now, if you've watched my previous video on the subject or seen any of my streams, you'll know that 2 of the cards that I really enjoyed playing in the deck were Curious Obsession and Staggering Insight. These are great. They're awesome cards, Staggering Insight especially providing lifelink against a field where incremental life gain really does a lot to make sure that you make it to your endgame is fantastic. And drawing cards is always good. But what's better than drawing cards is just getting to put stuff on the field for free, or close to free, or just way under cost. And Collected Company does exactly that. I think if I'm going to go back to this deck, I'm dropping the Obsession and the Insight and just playing the Bant version. Even if the mana is a little bit worse, that's okay, because Collected Company does so many things exactly when you want it to, which is in response to whatever your opponent is doing. And the deck has an incredible sideboard that's built and tuned to take on just about anything you're sitting across from. The only card that I'm not sure about in the sideboard is Permeating Mass. The card's fine, and it turns your opponent's creatures into copies of itself, which, assuming your opponent isn't also on the Spirit's plan, is really quite good for you. It also doesn't have flying, so if you do turn your opponent's Emrakul or Kalidas into one of these, they're not going to block what you have coming through at them. But I'm not sure it's doing anything that we wouldn't rather see another Deputy of Detention or Reflector Mage do instead. I'm sure I'll tool around with it and see what I can come up with, but realistically, I don't see this staying in the sideboard for very long. And that's it. Short, sweet, to the point. I'm not trying to speculate too much, but I am speculating because we have a pretty solid track record of seeing when combo decks like these end up at the top tables and have a really strong win rate, something usually goes sooner than later. Now, I don't know that I hope anything gets banned because the format is very healthy right now. It's fun to play, people seem to love Pioneer in general. I think that it's one of the best decisions that Wizards has made in a very, very long time. But if something is going to go, I'm just going to guess it'll be from the Lotus Breach deck, as that's a little bit harder to play against in general. I mean, you can't exactly Field of Ruin a Lotus field. Things got hexproof, which is weird to see hexproof on a land. But that's not what's important. What's important is that you should be playing Spirits. I know I'm going to be. Or maybe you should just play one of the other combo decks. I mean, they're both really good. Obviously, they made it to the finals of the Players Tour. Almost said Pro Tour there. That's not the thing anymore. Yeah, that's not the thing anymore. But that's okay. There's still plenty of high-level Magic to watch and maybe participate in if you're there. And I hope all of you who are aspiring to get to the PT or the Mythic Championship do so. I want to hear from you guys in the comments. What are you testing with? What are you expecting is going to happen over the next couple of weeks? And what do you want to see me play on stream? Leave a comment below, and I'll see you all in the next one.